Hello, and welcome to a um, impromptu stream on this occasion. Um, and yeah, I've been joined very kindly by Cringe. He's currently sorting out his microphone situation. Um,
Slowly.
I think. Have you got it sorted, Cringe Walker? Oh
No.
yeah, no. Okay, so he's still sorting it. So I'll just give you the lowdown. So I've called this one Emergent versus top-down behaviour. So this was a debate which um, I know it's for some in some circles. It's a bit of an old debate because it's been somewhat answered. Hello, Josh. Um, yeah, so it's been somewhat answered in distant circles like months and months ago. But one thing that's quite oh hello Bilbo. Good morning to you. One thing that's happened recently is that I've noticed that there are many people, and one person, because I did an interview, as some of you may know, for Wellington Project, and the person I spoke to um, was talking about how his thesis on um, his interaction with leftist activists who tried to get him booted from his job was that it was a like an emergent. This is like an emergent behavior that has formed in universities, and it's somewhat not. I know I'm going to put words in his mouth. We didn't say grassroots exactly, but it is something that is in his position bottom up, and I sort of pressed him on that if he thought it was bottom up because I wanted to be clear on that matter, and he thinks it was. Now, the other person who I've interviewed, who faced something similar but in the art world, Alexander Adams, he's very much on the perspective of the opposite, that is actually a top-down phenomenon, with, I guess, what you could say, uh, laws that have been set in place, like from the Blair years, which have been passed, and you're seeing like the natural reaction of this because precedent has been set, and the I've been reading sort of reading, but also and check out Skeptical Waves channel because it's been really good source lately with Carl Smith content. But actually, like the Carl Smith goes into great detail in how culture and how society and power functions directly from what what a power what a group of elites, let's say, because it had to be a group of elites, do with the law of the land, and that basically all things that all decisions basically derive from just legal decisions. And if you have control over
Yes.
the law, the
Test.
courts. Oh, hello, Cringe Walker, you back?
Am I audible?
Oh yeah, you're a lot better. You're a lot better.
All right.
That's a lot better. So yeah, so Cringe Walker, I was just giving people the lowdown of what this sort of a debate, which is it's gone in sort of reactionary circles already, but it's something that I've noticed that the more centre right, cultural right, um, I guess you could say maybe like Thatcherite, libertarians, but sort of, I mean, I know the milk toast right, I guess you could say, but this is something they've actually recently come across, and because one of the things that it's really fascinating is that you can watch various channels talking about woke ideology, woke culture to the cows come home. But I've noticed that they've reached this sort of half-life point where they're really struggling to expand upon woke culture further with and you're moving
Yeah.
beyond the
Yeah.
realm of understanding that they have. They've sort of reached a point where they can't really comprehend how it came into being or why it's come into being, but they can, I mean, they can identify it, but then they can't identify it. It's a really bizarre paradox which is formed within the cultural right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's weird that there's a little bit of maybe a 2-second delay between when it shows up on the screen, because I'm using an Airlink, which is Wi-Fi. Anyway, though, I think a lot of this might somewhat remind me of some of the experimental techniques of governing that the Ottoman Empire tried out, like
Mm,
trying to give into local identity politics. And I think at first the Ottomans thought, oh yeah, if everybody's divided, then none of them can unite to fight us. But what they failed to realize is that uh, groups can work together to get their own piece of the pie, and B, foreign influence can more easily enter through disparate like minority groups than through majority ones. And
mm.
that's basically how the Ottoman Empire crashed and burned.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say the same for the British Empire in India. I mean, we kind of did that as well. um, to a less, well, maybe not to the extreme extent that the Ottomans, because one thing that I would say with the Ottomans is the conversion of the ethnic Bosnian Herzegovinians and Albanians wasn't a I guess individual acts of pious Muslim missionaries. It was actually very much state driven event, predominantly because if you look at the sort of geographical position of Bosnia and Herzegovina within the um, I guess you could say within the Balkans, but within the Ottoman realms, it was right on the border with the Holy Roman Empire and those territories, and it was situated in central, like the most central part of Ottoman control in Europe. So there was with also access to the Adriatic. Um, on top of that, the Bosnians had a very long history of being heretical when it came to the sort of Nicene consensus on Christianity. There was very much you had the Bognialists. I forgot. Um, and uh, you also had then the Church of Bosnia, which was I guess you could say like a proto-Protestant church, if you wanted to be
Yeah.
generous. Um, and the thing there was Christianity was you had all these sects forming in Bosnia, and so Christianity, the Catholic Church, wasn't as dominant, even though that the Bosnian nobility were Catholic, and in sort of both well, like in legal terms, it was classed as a Catholic kingdom. You did have obviously like Orthodox Serbs living within this, within the realm. But when it was conquered, the Bosnian population. I mean, when I remember looking into it right back along when I was quite interested in that, the Bosnian population were very, very willing to submit to Islam and convert, maybe because you didn't have that cultural and group attachment to Christianity, because Christianity was in a constant flux and changing, indefinite and hard to pin down as a
Yeah.
religious force, compared to say how the Serbs viewed their Orthodoxy Christianity, or how the Croats viewed Roman Catholicism, and same said for the Albanians as well in this. And then of course under Ottoman rule, um, you had like the jizya tax and everything, which motivated, because you had actually, people forget this, there were a lot of Greeks or ethnic Greeks who lived in Turkey, who pretty much just converted um,
Yeah, yeah,
over
yeah. It's
generation.
funny. Sorry, I noticed the
You go
delay.
ahead. You go ahead. So
No, like before those population exchanges after World War One, and to this day, actually, like yeah, there's always the meme of a Turk who goes to get a DNA test and it says he's Greek, and and he questions he doesn't question his life, he questions science because it's like such a enforced identity. Um,
yeah,
I think that like the Ottoman Empire creates quite a bit of uh, a kind of like roadmap for what the West is doing to itself. Um,
yeah,
you know, and it's fast too. Like we can I think we can now call America the sick man of globalism. Although perhaps now Canada deserves that title. Um,
I don't think
and
Canada was
these are
really
things.
ever a power, though. I mean, I would say America definitely, especially under Joe Biden. Yeah, I mean, Joe Biden's been, even though we know that he's not leader and presidents aren't really leaders in any sort of sense, there were any power brokers in this. But I mean, it's just been a complete and utter disaster. I mean, there's no framing, there's no positive framing coming out of anything they do, which is amazing.
Well, you can tell the propaganda is pretty strong because a third of the country is just convinced that he's good no matter what. Um, and this is like something you see in Ottoman history as well, where like you know it
Mm,
took the Turks like the Turks stayed with the Sultan until there was literally nothing left of the Ottoman Empire but Turkey, right?
yeah,
It took the British and the French and other forces marching on Turkey on Anatolia for them to actually decide maybe the Sultan isn't a good idea. Like they had already lost their entire empire. Like there was just Turkey left. The enemy was marching through their streets, and that's when they decided, oh, maybe now's the time to change for a new form of government and elites. So you can definitely tell that like when you got the right propaganda in place, you can hold on to the literally the enemy is marching through your gates.
yeah. I mean, but this is I mean, all regimes which have been, I guess you could say, all cultures, all regimes which have been in their sort of the death spiral, when the end is near, you always have that dedicated few who are idol. I mean, I was watching actually a documentary. It was an Irish documentary on the final
Mm,
days of the Ceausescu's in Romania. Um, and what was fascinating was you still had like secret police loyalists and military loyalists who, in the face of what you would think to be obvious, the army has turned against you, the media's turned against you, the population at large has turned against you. There's like no visible support. A lot of communists were being attacked in the street, hunted down, or were remaining silent or fleeing, and you still had like this ideologically uh, uh, devoted secret police like the Securitate who were like snipers in buildings around Bucharest, and then sort of like just
yeah.
continuing to fight. And one thing I couldn't really reconcile was, was it like do they think that they could either put a stop to this, or was it, you know what, we know subconsciously that it's over, so when we're just going to go out and cause maximum damage as possible? Because I do wonder that if some of these progressive types, like in America, they know it's kind of over or it's going to finish soon, and so now they just want to cause maximum damage, like a
Yes. Yeah. No.
kamikaze
No.
pilot.
Sorry, I'm the delays again. You're completely right. I think that I mean I think we've both been in enough progressive like indoctrination courses to know that they've been sensing it's coming to the end pretty soon, and so they're just trying their best to
Yeah,
like it is quite vindictive. Um, but you're right. Like you can also imagine this with like the Japanese like before the emperor called off the war, they were getting ready to just mass die, like suicide bomb in the streets for every tank that lands on the shores of Japan and just die with their emperor. There are
yeah,
some things which are essentially cults of death, where they will go out this way.
Yeah.
Ironically, most of the Soviet Union wasn't this way because like most of them just gave up and became capitalists like day one. But then you get stuff like you're just describing, where they will fight not for any victory, but to cause maximum destruction. The Nazis are like that too, as you might remember. They refused to surrender. They refused to
Hmm.
they refused to surrender unconditionally, and so they just caused as much death as they could. And then, diverting your vital economic powerhouses for fighting a war in order to be vindictive and kill, certain people groups is a lot of evidence to suggest like what degree in which you're aware you're losing, and instead of folding honorably, you're just going to take out as much as you can on the way out, which is kind of pathetic, actually. I do think that progressives are in that line because you can already see it in terms of how they act when they do lose assets, when they do start to lose power, they start to destroy it, right? They don't allow
Yeah.
it to exchange hands. They'd rather burn it down.
Yeah. I mean, what's been amazing is that there was a recent case with Afghanistan. I believe it was like a pregnant journalist, feminist, that sort of stuff, and New Zealand being run by a very progressive feminist, person. Um, they've refused entry, and America's refused entry, and all the sort of progressive groups and everything that were big on promoting like the female battalions, fighting the misogynistic Taliban and everything else, and and proving that women are capable, and that were upholding LGBT BLM egalitarian values, and all these people who are stuck now, they've sort of abandoned them. And so this is what's amazing, is in all this they won't just destroy it, but they'll abandon their own, if they the ones that have basically fallen behind enemy lines. um they won't they won't even actively, with opportunity, help their fellow comrades in this, um which again is something I don't think is talked about enough, because the and so if there is like a regime change, which everyone on the distant right is wants, this is their main goal, whether it's or some I know want to ride the tiger and everything until sort of a regime change, but regime change nonetheless. um then the problem you have is when the new regime comes in, you have to make sure that these people aren't able to sort of realign themselves within the new regime, and sort of continue their destructive work from within. Um, uh, the dedicated followers of the old ones. I mean, effectively, without being too sort of Fed posty about it, but they need to be, they need to be purged. Ultimately, I mean, I mean, purged in the
You want a
sense
black
of,
pill about this?
yeah, go ahead.
So a lot of the news recently has been saying that 20% of Zoomers are LGBTQ, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
I saw that one. Yeah.
you know, you already have below, like I'm talking about American citizens. I don't care what race they are. The American citizen is already below replacement birth rates. Imagine now removing a fifth of those below replacement birth rates of American citizens. Like, what are you gonna do in like 20 years when that missing labor, 40 years when that missing labor isn't there? You can't just like that's too big for immigration to solve. You can't immigrate that many people. The boats just aren't that big enough, and they don't travel that fast enough.
Hmm.
So, as far as I'm concerned, they've already. I don't want to say they've won, but this civilization is doomed. America, my civilization, is doomed. It's not going to survive for another 60 years because the Zoomers are going to grow up and they're going to be already experiencing like below replacement levels of birth. So, very few people being born, not enough people coming in because the third world is advancing and would like to keep its own. And as those nations advance, they're not going to permit or encourage leaving the homeland. Um, And the U.S. might have a hissy fit and start wars, but I don't think they're going to be as effective as they were in the past. So now the Zoomers get old, and they don't have as many people to take care of. The millennials aren't going to have enough people to take care of them when they're old. The Zoomers are simply fucked completely. But by the time you get to the 2060s or 2080s, you just don't have a functioning country anymore. There's just no way. It's going to be starvation and economic decline. It'll be third world status, like Brazil or Argentina in the 1920s, when they had all the money and power of the world, but they had no ability to organize and sustain it. So they just, within 20 years, were crap holes, despite being the richest countries in the world a few decades prior. Now, along that path, at any point in time, there may be what I like to call a mule. Taking from Asimov's writing, the mule is a unforeseen variable that changes the course. In the extreme cases, this could be someone like Pinochet. In lighter cases, it can just be someone who invents a new technology or something that changes things. Like Musk is a mule in the sense that he's disrupted a lot of technology. Bezos is a mule because he's disrupted a lot of infrastructure assumptions. These are mules. There's a good like in Asimov's story writing. A mule is someone who breaks a predictive model by being outside of the predictive model, and then you need a new model. But as of right now, I don't see how the United States is a sustainable country within the next 3 generations, maybe 2. And so, in a certain sense, the progressive have already won in the long game, but not won in the sense of like ruling. Won in the sense that there won't be anything left to take or inherit or conquer. It'll be dead. And so, that's my thought about that.
Yeah, and to go a bit deeper, that I mean, in my country as well, when I was born, since when I was born, there's now 2 million less British people alive in the country. So the replacement rate here is, self-evident. It's not good. I don't think it's bad as America, but it's not good, especially with. I mean, but the problem with my country is that there is a horrendous increase in mass immigration, to levels where it's soon it's going to reach 1 million a year, which is just going to be insane. That's my prediction, at least. And so, I mean, this comes back to what we were saying about the title of the stream. So, Chris Walker, I was just telling the people chat earlier, but I was doing an interview, and it was about the progressives and the way that they behave and the way that the system operates, basically. And the person who I interviewed, his position was that it was all, effectively, it was all done in an emergent sort of bottom up way by, uh, like, say, student activist groups, and they didn't have like someone on high giving them orders. And so he says this is it's like a bottom up stuff. And then another person I interviewed, which I think Alexander Adams, his position is obviously more of the distant right position, the reaction right, is that no, it's top down. That you have elites, they set laws play out over time, and then they inform decisions, which is then informs the activist base, the corporations, the media, the NGOs, the policymakers, the think tanks, etc., etc. What you would call the cathedral, effectively. That sort of, and yes, it is decentralized. And I've been thinking about those two positions, because I think there is something that I don't want to say both of them are right, because they can't be, but there is something to that. So I think what I've noticed, and from taking from both information sort of perspectives on this, is that you actually I want to coin the term like the Thomas Becket scenario, okay? So where effectively these like student activists, he's right, they don't take orders from up high. There's no, you don't have like George Soros or Tony Blair or Vanguard or BlackRock or Ben and Jerry's. They're not like phoning up these activists and telling them do this, do that, start doing this or anything like that. That's not how it works, obviously. But because of legal and legislation and amendments and changes in like major world powers like in America, which promotes the pos, and those legal settlements then become, I guess, normalized in the international field when it comes to policy, whether at the G8, at the World Economic Forum, at the World Trade Organization, whatever it be, and the UN as well, of course, big player in all this. And so it then sort of filters through to the to other Western powers. And so when you have it gets to like the end point, it then becomes unquestionable because it's not seen as a political action, but it's just seen as a normal procedure for lots of these activists, like the foot soldiers, who aren't elites themselves, but they work for the elites as just foot soldiers. So this could be activists, politicians, local politicians, national politicians. They don't have any power or say or control in this matter, but they 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 promote whatever is brought down upon high. But because the ideology that they've the progressives been doing, which has been in the past so effective and easy to enact, that when I say like Thomas Becket sort of scenario is they don't need orders. They know. So if they come across somebody talking about, like my guest, white shift or white demographics or anything like that, they know what to do. They don't need orders. They know what to do because they can identify enemy. They can identify threats to what their sort of the ideology, threats to the ideology, threats to the regime. They can identify it and act accordingly.
Mhm.
And I think this does play into Moldbug's sort of idea of like the fact that his important thing about the cathedral is that it's decentralized. And that is what's one of their greatest power is effectively you could take, I mean, in theory you could take out the Blair Foundation, you could take out Vanguard, BlackRock, you could take out various like JP Morgan, people who finance HSBC. You could take all these people out, but the problem is it's like cutting the head off the hydra. You take out one, but then the others remain, and then more will probably grow back. So it's
Yeah, you have to really just chop out the bureaucratic machine that enables it. The bugmen that run the system. Once
it
they're cut out, then these foreign entities have no ins. Because like, you'll be surprised how often the local bureaucrat who interprets laws a little bit too broadly or flexibly allows this to happen. Different like infiltrations or like an anarcho tyranny kind of policies to different groups in jail and court cases. Fundamentally, if you were to if you just fired like half of all government employees, like Moldbug's rage solution, uh, you would greatly reduce the number of points of entry for subversion to enter through. And because there's fewer entry points, it's more likely to get caught and rejected. That's not necessarily a solution; it just slows things down, but it does like
yeah
reduce the speed. And this is usually what Republicans have accidentally done when they do manage to stop progress. And it's usually pretty done messily because they don't actually know what they're doing that's working. But
yeah
like whenever they reduce the size of the bureaucracy, they do manage to slow down progress, but they can never undo it because they're too retarded to like realize that you have to like actively replace the existing hierarchy, actively replace the existing bureaucracy, and they're too retarded to know how to do management stuff. They're just good at like barking at problems and then doing nothing when they get given positions to do something. Uh,
Yeah,
so
that's
yeah,
yeah. I was just going to say, Fez is correct on this point. But I mean, that's what the Conservatives Party in the UK has done today. There was you probably saw it like a bit back in the throw, where effectively the Education Secretary has um you know brought out this new policy about how to deal with sensitive political subjects and LGBT education and all that in schools, and basically sort of
yeah,
mandating a neutral position, which is I mean, just to show how naive these are, because of course there is no neutral position to this. There's always an angle. There's always political angles to everything. It's not you can't
yeah.
because I like to know, well, what is neutral? What is neutral? Because on the British Empire, I mean, how do you describe that neutrally? You have the teacher
Yeah,
saying, well,
sorry.
I was going to say, well, you're going to have the teacher in class saying, well, the British Empire did good here, but it also did bad here. I mean, I don't know how you're going to do it, because the wording, the way that the British Empire in this country is, anyway, how it's talked about in even in just like documentary terms, is always negative. So but what's inadvertently happened is it's pissed off a lot of people. One of which blocked me today. A order of the British Empire, nonetheless. Some trade unionist cow, and she she was massively pissed off that sex offenders can't go into schools and diddle kids. And you know what, sue me. That's effectively what I take away from it. And they're massively pissed off that a Conservative government is not allowing progressive leftists to
Yeah,
actively diddle kids on their terms. Now, I'm not saying that, well done Conservatives based on all that, because what they've done is they've put a temporary, I wouldn't even say stop, a slow mo to it, until it changes. But as you point out, I don't think whether it was designed to or not, um, it, it as I pointed out, I think on Twitter earlier about this point, it's not good enough to just put a stop. You actually have, Section 28,
yeah,
where you ban sort of homosexual teachings because it has too close links to paedophilia. Um, that I mean, my position is no. The Conservative position was you bring back Section 28 and you extend it to the workplace, to policing, to the army, to everything. You just get that clip, someone's Bowden, clear them out, clear them out, clear them out. That's what you do. You
yeah.
bring
Like
back Section 28.
sorry. I'm noticing the delay. It's not a delay on my end. I hear you fine, but there's a delay in terms of when I see the ring bounce out when I speak and when I actually speak. So like, it's don't worry about it. But I wanted to just say that like what you have to do now, if in your local governments, and everyone listening here, is you now have to go into basically you have to go to local people and ask them what in your town is a bureaucracy that is filled with a bunch of people that are points of entry for subversion, and how can you shrink that down this year? And these are
Yeah,
small, little, bite-sized methods that you can reclaim your country. You're not going to fix anything by going to like big scale institutions and all this other stuff without you as a top person have to look at the bottom organization in the local area, and then it will reflect back up at the top. But like that's how you do what the leftists do basically. So like for example, just to give an example of that, let's say wherever you live, there's probably going to be some kind of institution at a local township level or shireship level that runs like what gets taught in schools, what books are chosen, what courses are made at the local level. And perhaps they take some advice from the top or not, I don't know. But you now have to organize at a local community level what you want to teach your kids and make that enforced. And then you frankly have to fire and ruin from careers the people that want to stop that because they're stopping you from teaching your kids how to be British, basically. and and that when every local institution is captured by your bugmen, basically, when you put your bugmen into the hive, then the people above that are trying to impress them within the state aren't going to get as many loyalty points, right? They're going to have some challenges there. So, like in a certain sense, you're still doing a top-down approach. You're just the top here is not from the state; it's from an independent like group of people financing and pushing local people. Like you need to find your own spiteful mutants in this system, and maybe that's like North FC guy, right? You guys have the North FC guys who are like, yeah, they're usually labor voters, but they're pretty socially conservative. And so you need to organize these fat lardies, toffers, whatever you call them. I don't know the language there. And you basically have to roll them out into the universities and have them just like barrage the local people. You need to like find people that are willing to finance the buses, send them to the local schools, and demand changes. You know, and then you'll start seeing things change at upper levels as they start noticing the lower levels are rejecting this.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying on that, because they effectively North FC and South FC, but basically Essex man and Yorkshireman. It's really funny because Yorkshire, which is for people not in the UK, Northern England, it's a very fine place because it is where populist right wing and quite nationalist right wing politics um, has a very strong footing. When you ever like when you had like the rise of the BNP and National Front, they did, if I remember correctly, they did quite well in Yorkshire, and then same with UKIP. When UKIP came on the scene, you had strong showing in Yorkshire, but also Southern. I mean, mainly Southern England with UKIP though. But yeah, those sort of people. I mean, to be honest, those sort of people should be. You know, I've have you ever there was so I just want to address this. So Fez puts up, no, let's skip the slippery start the slope and just start teaching Desard in kindergarten. Um, I, I have actually attempted to read the 120 Days of Sodom, and I couldn't get beyond like the first 20 pages.
Is
To be
this like a degenerate book or something I've heard of?
you know what? It's so degenerate. You know how Fed posting, and how nonchalant I care about my channel, that I don't care if I get banned. I'm not even going to attempt to give you the summary of the book, because if I do, I know that I'm too worried that someone might clip this out, and it is. I will tell you after the stream, but it is
Yeah.
unbelievably degenerate that I uh Oh, now Fez, you do not tell me that you've read it all the way through, because I refuse to believe that anybody can read it all the way through without having a mental breakdown at the end. It it, it
I I'm just
it's
lucky that I'm not influenced by like subversion anymore. But it's yeah, I mean like if you know this kind of stuff is happening at a local level, you
yeah,
basically like you can't think of it in the sense that you're an elite, that you're going to conquer an institution. You are going to direct from the top down, but the way in which you do that is that you start changing out the local bugmen first. Because once you change out the local bugmen, and it's gonna be top down in that sense, you and your friends are gonna have to finance and push for like very local bugman activities, and like that involves like basically in the same way the leftists will have these like stupid mutants at like local offices and HR departments that like subvert and arrest and like fire people that are like mainstream and old. You have to do the kind of the opposite, whereby which you kind of finance people suing the HR department for these things. And
right.
you could do things like we are an HR free office, although in some places that's not legally allowed anymore, which is ridiculous. But like I'm kind of rambling here, but the way in which things happen from the top down is not by you inserting yourself at the top and then directing down. It's you inserting your own lower people and then getting to the top through them. Tony Blair does this in many different institutions in Africa, as you notice. Right? He
Yes,
takes all these like he takes all these like black kids being taught in the UK and subverts them to his dark will, and then when they go back to Africa, they like allow him in as guests or as like advisory boards and stuff like that. So he's like he takes this little like class of people and then gets into different states through them.
Yes. Just little Ahmed. A powerful Fabian you will become.
Yeah.
Uh, friend of the channel here, Rory Herbert, has joined, and he said, you'll never rid the left of school teachers in the UK. The answer is homeschooling. I mean, yeah, I
Yes.
mean,
True.
you never get rid of them, all of them. But one thing I was thinking, and I, I've been advocating on this channel along with along with a few of my pals of getting involved in local politics and everything. But actually, I might do a sort of a retcon of my previous statements, if you will. As I say, after reading, Carl Smith and a bit of Juvenal as well, I started on Juvenal. I actually have come to the decision that that maybe, and because I know there are young people watching, and I was saying if you want to make a difference, it actually is probably more beneficial to go into law, right?
Yeah.
Um, I noticed that a lot of like Blair, he went into law. A lot of, like Keir Starmer, a lot of the people who he surrounded himself with were lawyers, and they sort of embed themselves within the legal profession. And I would say, like, if you are a reactionary right person, whether you're in America or in any other European country, you go into law, because if you can go into law and work your way within the legal system, and let's just say, like, within 20 years, 30 years time, you have like a vanguard, network of tens who are judges, then you determine what is sovereign on the legal basis. I mean, it's not the only thing that determines
Yeah.
sovereignty, but it's a big thing, because you could just stop, like, you can stop anything the progressive wants.
But you don't really stop anything. What you do is you
No, 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 when I say
what?
stop it, I'm not saying that you actually like change the course. I'm just saying you bring any sort of the unstoppable march of progress to a halt.
You
All
can't
you've
you
got to
can't
spin.
just you can't bring progress to a halt. You need to like uproot the direction that you're going to, which requires going backwards a little bit. So like how can you legally argue for an end to your Supreme Court because it's been like grafted on? That's I don't think you can do it alone. You need to like form a formidable legal body to challenge that. Um,
Um, yeah, I mean, like in the UK, side thing about, because I know Blair's a hot topic on the reactionary right these days. Um, he created, because of course in this country the Supreme Court was created, I think, in 2006 by him. We didn't have the Supreme Court. There's what we had before that filled not the same function, but a similar function, was the law lords, right? And that was the lords sitting in the House of Lords and everything else. And then you had the High Court. You had the High Court, which was which is surprisingly has actually remained quite I'm going to say neutral, but they've remained quite isolated from activists, um, especially like over the whole Brexit thing,
yeah.
which did surprise me, because they actually sided with the actual statute that stated, well, we can't get involved in politics. That's up for Parliament. And then it went to the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court was created by Blair, and it was created along they say it's created along the American model, but it's not. It's actually created along the French model. So that's
Even
how
worse.
Blair operated. It was the French model, and the people at the time didn't realize that its function was to be politically to be a politically active body, and that wasn't really realised until their decision over the proroguing of Parliament, where they basically usurped the sovereign. They usurped sovereignty. I mean, this, if you want to talk about, like, Carl Smith and his sort of work on political philosophy and the sort of the premise of sovereignty, it's classic sort of um what you see in his work is what plays out, or what I saw play out during that period in late 2019, where effectively the Supreme Court said the sovereign is no longer the sovereign, and the Supreme Court encumbers the legal sovereign and the political sovereign, i.e., basically the Supreme Court said uh, the Queen is no longer technically the figurehead of the head of the Crown Prosecution Service, as there is no Crown Prosecution Service, there is no Crown, and there is no Her Majesty's government. We encompass all decision. That's all on us.
Yeah.
We are and effectively that was a coup in many ways, because that was that's the first time they exercised that power. Now, I mean, I remember having a real rant at the time on this, and I basically said effectively the army should have been deployed to arrest them and sent them down to Traitors Gate, where they can be put on display. That was my sort of the way that they should have happened. My view should have happened, but the Supreme Court though is very interesting because and people don't remember this, but when you had the Chilcot report, which was into the Iraq War and everything, one thing that happened that was sneakily happened, because again, as I mentioned, Blair created the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court passed something, a judgment where they stated that Tony Blair could not be prosecuted for any war crimes from now in the future, including if ever new evidence came about.
Yeah, you've been a dictatorship for a while.
Yeah. And so I mean, just again, sovereign is he who makes the exception. So again, clear just clear sort of position of who's really in control of this, everything that goes on here. And I mean, the ultimate aim of any regime change in UK would have to be just the absolute destruction of the Supreme Court, and then stating in law that every decision made by the Supreme Court was illegal and treacherous in nature.
So you have a goal there, right? So what are you doing to get into law to argue that goal?
Well, I'm not getting into law, but I am getting into politics. I mean, I would say two-prong, sort of from the right, is get into law for many, and then the select few go into politics, because and then maybe I might create like a third wing that goes into the military, like officer training at Sandhurst.
Yeah, well, you have to be careful about delusions of grandeur because the things that you are talking about take well over 20 years to organize and accomplish. Blair did that in the 40 years he was doing planning this, right? So using him as an example, he started planning this stuff back in the 80s and 90s, and then he executed his plan, and now he's managing the plan into legacy basically. And so this is a lifetime effort that he put himself purely dedicated in and put his will to, right? Like all of his hate and power, right? He is in
Yeah,
many ways like the exemplar Sith because yeah, if you dedicate your whole life to something like that, if you plan it in the correct steps and you don't jump outside of your boundaries, the steps that you aren't at yet, which requires a remarkable amount of self-discipline, then yeah, you get your will. You win in the
yeah,
end. And so what you should do is learn from Blair in the sense of yeah, everything you just said sounds great. Now, why don't you try structuring it and meeting some targeted goals every year of your life so that when you're 60 years old or 70 in his case, you can rest well knowing you got your will done. If you're saying you're not going to be the one to go into law and you're not going to be the one to do this, then you could be the one that goes to a pub and finds people to start organizing this. You can hang around, talk around people, look for talent that you can tell is better than your own,
yeah,
and start forming those relationships that 10 years down the road form into political alliances.
yeah,
But these are lifetime decisions that are you've set the course, you're sure you're right, and now you accept that you've defined and refined who you are, what your goals are, and you're not going to deviate from them for the rest of your life. And that is a commitment.
yeah. That is very true, and when I say I hope that if there's people watching here, because I know there are. I see on the algorithms before that some people who watch them are quite young, like the young men. That if you don't know what to do and you're interested in all this, you're already here, so you're interested in this stuff. Maybe check out law. Because that is it's a good profession, pays
Yeah.
well. It's a thing. Now, T here says, I still don't understand why the Tories haven't rolled back any of Blair's changes. I would say to T, go and buy, and if you don't want to pay for it, which I don't blame you, maybe find it on YouTube. It's the audio book or book of David Cameron, and I think it's called. It's either For the Record or On the Record. And if you I would say get the audiobook, because he actually he does the voice for it, David Cameron himself. If you get that and you read through the sections of progressive conservatism and his rise to power, you will understand why the Tories haven't rolled back any of Blair's
Yeah.
institutional changes. And when you understand that, that's a massive black pill to swallow, because David Cameron's basically saying in his own words, I am the prince, I am the Sith apprentice to Lord Blair. So fundamentally,
It's
what it
it's
comes down
important
to.
to remember, when you say conservative, what are you conserving? You're not conserving social values or morals. You're conserving power. That's what you're doing.
But that's what Cameron actually says in the book. He says we are conserving the immense changes that have happened to Britain, and we're going to continue that legacy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-oh. Yeah.
Yeah. He was, yeah. So one thing that I think where you had internal factional difference within the Blair regime was how Blair went about the Middle Eastern wars. And I mean, there were people who supported Blair who actually turned on him because of this. Yeah. But remember what Cameron did with Libya. So
Yeah.
he didn't exactly learn. And also, I mean, just another point, Cameron unironically said in the book that Britain doesn't have a constitution, or has never had a constitution. Bearing in mind, he went to, what was it Oxford, Cambridge, and studied like political philosophy, and he didn't. And he even had like fucking David Starkey as a tutor at one point. And it's like, Britain doesn't. No, was it? Britain doesn't have a Bill of Rights. That was what he said. Britain doesn't have a Bill of Rights, and it's like, I want to create a Bill of Rights of Britain. It's like, oh, you fucking idiots! 1688. Still getting
These, you don't understand that they're playing off of popular ignorance to like pretend like they've accomplished something new, right? And this is also one of the major problems with democracies in general, where the need to impress the mob results in redundancies and bureaucracies and all these things in the name of like progress that oftentimes have already been made but people forgot, or just layering on top of existing things that aren't necessary. I've actually been reading through a author recently. Let me grab a quote. She is a liberal author, but and it's funny because a lot of my professors here are like using her as a source text, but they're like misreading her in some sense, because she was clearly like a little bit more based than they're used to. And when you give a bugman something that's incredibly based, all they can do is just try to reconceptualize it in the framework that they're used to. Sorry, I'm just loading my Twitter account where I posted it last. Fill the air.
right. Yeah. I think Starkey on one of his shows referenced that referenced the fact that from that book, that from Cameron's book, that he was unaware of the Bill of Rights. Bearing in mind, but the thing is, Starkey actually believes, like I believe, Chris Walker, that Cameron wasn't trying to pretend to achieve something. He actually just doesn't know. He is that ignorant that he just. And to be honest, from what I understand of Cameron, he is just a clueless twat. To be honest,
I mean, he did fuck a pig, so
yeah, he did. So, I mean, the only thing that I would say for Boris is that he knows his thing on ancient Greece and Greek mythology, but I know there's been some skepticism of whether or not he knows, if he actually his depth of knowledge on that subject, or if is it just like sort of surface level knowledge. I don't know.
I think
mean,
I think he's very educated. The problem is I don't think he's motivated to preserve what's good, right?
yeah.
It's also quite evident that you know, his throne is often given to those that he gives his bed to.
Yeah. You know, I would.
I found sorry, I found the quote. It's by do you know who Hannah Arendt is, or Arendt maybe?
No, I don't.
She's a libtard from like the 1960s, but has a few funny lines about more of an anarchist libtard. And she wrote, in a fully developed bureaucracy, there is nobody left with whom one can argue, to whom one can present grievances, on whom the pressures of power can be exerted. Bureaucracy is the form of government in which everybody is deprived of political freedom, of the power to act, for the rule by nobody is not no rule, and where all are equally powerless, we have a tyranny without a tyrant. And that's kind of what you guys are living under a bit, with this like bureaucratic staffing that just
Yeah.
does really dumb things.
You know, it's really funny because that I think because when I was just listening to that, and it's strange this sounds to take this to, but I was watching. There was an interview. There's a clip on YouTube, and it's an interview I think if you type in George Lucas on democracy, right, and yeah, it's surprisingly based, because one thing that many lefties like to say is, oh, you know, the whole thing about Star Wars, it's from a like the left wing perspective, and Palpatine was like Nixon, and that's how the inspiration worked. But actually, he George Lucas used Nixon as an example, but in some, like, you're formulating early Palpatine, but in the prequels, um, he was very much, he pretty much said that, that there is a, if you look at like the American Republic now, he says, his thing was about how easily it can be subverted, because he basically says democracy is just weak. It's effectively weak form of governance, and it can't prevent itself from in a crisis, because he talks about the point of the crisis. It's when you have a crisis, so like in Star Wars and the prequels, it's the Galactic Civil War between the separatists, the system, what was it, the CIS, the CIS, against the Republic, and in that moment of crisis, the Republic cannot, it hasn't got that will to I guess uphold itself, because the thing though is that I mean this is something I always notice when I watch Revenge of the Sith, or especially when I was younger, I was into the comics as well, that went one thing I remember going into the comics was that how quickly the institutions of the republics and like favorite characters that were around in the Republic time, how quickly they switched to the Empire, because effectively the Republic just, it it didn't need to be overthrown by Palpatine. It was going to happen anyway.
Yeah.
And that's the point. Is, and I think this is why that's why I don't say, oh, Palpatine did this great coup. He really didn't. It was all he had to do was just destroy the Jedi Order, and it was collapsing. It just collapsed in on itself anyway.
Well, that's the thing. Like the Republic was, and the Republic didn't even have an army by the time that the
No,
prequels happened.
they
So like they
used
didn't
to.
even have an army. What?
I was saying in the it's probably Legends now, but in the Old Republic time they did. It was after the last the last Sith, like the Great War with the Sith, the last one. Um, it was one of the chancellors. He basically was a massive libtard egalitarian shit lib who basically decided to um expand the state or expand Coruscant, the bureaucracy in Coruscant, abolish the military, use the Jedi as a police force, like a over glorified police force, and uh and also encourage like force integration around the galaxy, which um and also he forced the Jedi, because you had used to have these things called Jedi Lords, where basically these were Jedis who would sit in the outer rim planets with their own planet, like their own individual planet as their fiefdom, and they would basically act as local lords, protecting the system, and then paying fealty to the Republic. And he basically forced those Jedi's to give up to give up their fiefdoms, you know. um,
Yeah, and ironically, that's exactly what the Empire became, where the Senate was overthrown and the governors ruled directly like fiefdoms. So like it's like one big circle for net zero gain.
yeah, it's it's an interesting thing because of course what you go into then is like what they call the High Republic, where it's like the pinnacle peak of the Galactic Republic, which again it wasn't explored. I mean, I know there's going to be, in Star Wars universe, you're going to see it in like games coming up and everything. But the High Republic, I think in George's mind, he just said it was basically like the peak of the Roman Empire, effectively. Like Pax Romana period is how he sort of viewed it in the Old Republic, the Old Republic days, and then of course when you get to episode 1, it's the the fall of it and the start of it because of the bureaucratic state, because it is just I mean, like, even the Jedi, by the time you get to Revenge of the Sith, like all their things is like committee meetings and like fucking policy making decisions. It's like
Bureaucracy, yeah.
yeah, it's like
Yeah, it's the ultimately it's the nature of states to fossilize, and this is another reason why I hate the term right and left wing, because it implies that there's like A, only two options, B, that those options are like can be named and titled by like in opposition of each other, right? It's kind of
yeah,
like pre-programming you. It actually pre-programs you to obey everything on one side and not question if it's actually right or left wing and what right and left wing actually is. Like if you go back in time, like usually political cliques were based off of like class status rather than right and left. So like
yes,
it was very like abrupt. What you're doing isn't very high class, or what you're doing is very low class, or something like that, and that would just define your politics, right? And it's a bit more honest politics versus like, you get these ridiculous like if you talked about like if I asked you what right wing is, what define right wing for me?
I mean, my definition of well, number one, it depends on distant right or sort of the cultural right. I mean, I would like to say right wing would be someone who is religious, traditionalist, um, conservative in value when it comes to
So
uh,
pause right there. You
yeah,
you have not actually described anything. What you said religious, but you didn't say what religion or why that religion is valid. You said conservative and traditional, but like conservative of what? Tradition of what? Right? Like the Pakistani guy who wants to rape your wife and replace your queen with his progeny. He's
yeah,
very
yeah,
conservative.
yeah, yeah,
He's very traditional. Is he right
yeah,
wing? Maybe.
I mean, one of the problems, okay, because I'm number one, unlike uh, I guess it's socialism and Marxism and all that sort of stuff, um, is that a Marxist in Paris or a Marxist in New York or a Marxist in like Warsaw. I mean, they can all sing off the same hymn sheet, and they don't suffer from cultural divide because they are, they are the same person, and with the same values at the end of the day, and that's a strength because then you can you can uh, uh, you saw this in the Spanish Civil War when you had all the foreign legions and everything. It's like they're from people from different countries, but they share the same values and share the same goals, and they share the same um, ideology. And the problem is when I said the reason I was vague about it was because it is a hard thing to define because I can say, okay, Anglican, a traditionalist Anglican along the values of Protestantism, but then if you talk about a conservative in France, well, then he might determine it from like a Catholic angle, or a German might do it from like a sort of like a Prussian Lutheran angle, or even like a
Yeah.
Scot, like Nathan Hood, who's in the chat here. Well, he's not Scot himself, but Calvinist, I believe. He might do it from a sort of a Calvinist angle. So it it it, it is a hard thing to define because someone who is right wing in England and right wing in France and right wing in America and right wing in Brazil may not actually have that sort of connection that there's someone who
Yeah.
is a Marxist would.
This is why you have to be extremely careful about using abstract words and use more concrete words, right? So like a lot of times when people ask me what my politics are, I just say I'm an anti-materialist, right? Because
Yeah,
that just that immediately identifies me as outside the scope of like capitalism or communism, like both materialist views. And so once I'm outside that scope, I'm free to like not be assumed and grouped in and categorized by the existing materialist divisions. When you say you're anti materialist, um, then you materialism is like something which has definable characteristics regardless of being left wing or right wing. Or sometimes I'll just be if I want to be an asshole, I'll be like, oh, I'm not left wing or right wing. I'm a tail fin. I'm a bird tail or something like that. Right? Which has that's irrelevant. But like, you have to find a way to like break the political description because once you say you're right or left wing, you immediately allow your enemy to define you, victimize you, and like categorize you in ways you don't have control over. You have to avoid the language which gives power to your enemy, right? And once you say you're either right wing or left wing, whoever you're talking to now has power to define that as they view rather than how you view, right?
yeah,
Um, so whenever you have these discussions, just don't use language that gives power away. You describe yourself very concretely, uh, without using words that allow your enemy to define you or categorize you or filter you in ways that you don't have the power to control.
yeah. So I think this segues us into the next point that I was going to talk about, and this is something that I've skirted around the issue many times, because I know that some of my uh, Tory boy friends who are cringe, and so I will say some of them can be quite cringe at times. Um, will get a point. Is liberalism okay?
Hmm.
And that can be. Um, I mean, let's define it a bit more because I think there's going to be a debate. I think between Carl Benjamin or Sargon and Panama Hat on this point, but uh, classical English liberalism, is it and this is also a question for chat as well, is it a pipe dream or is there something that can be used from it or is liberalism just ultimately what has led to to wokeism and all the problems that we face today?
Yeah, that's it. The problem there is that liberalism doesn't define a destination; it defines uh, a vector, right?
Yeah.
And so the problem with defining your politics based off of movement rather than goals is that no one really has an idea of when to stop, right? You can continue liberalizing things until there is no such thing as a state, right? Like it's just, like anarchy is maybe the end of liberalism, because without any way in which to define a structure, you've maximized liberty, and well, then where do you stop, right? Then
Yeah.
once you're done with liberalizing the state, you still want to liberalize things because it's a vector. So you start looking at other things to liberalize, such as gender or culture or like other things, and then you get like progression, basically progressives. Um, so you really can't just use a word like liberalism because liberalism does not have a rest position. It only has a movement position. Yeah, that's also one of my big criticisms of reactionary because like if you define yourself as reacting to something or like wanting to go back to a previous status quo, yeah, I guess you have a destination, but it's unlikely you'll stay in that. It's unlikely you'll be happy at that destination when you get there, right? You have to use very concrete, fixed terms that define a goal, and how you get there. You let the adherent of that view decide, rather than the view be the vector.
Mm.
And then,
I,
actually, this is one of the major weaknesses of progressivism because progressives can never win in a certain sense because they can never stop progressing. And they'll progress themselves until they've atomized themselves into some deconstructed corpse of some ridiculous notion, right? So, in many ways, the benefit of having your enemy be progressives is that you can actually get them to attack themselves simply by being quiet. I've always said, if every right wing person got off Twitter today, then within a week, the people on Twitter would start attacking each other on the left because they have no one left to fight on the right. They have to progress towards something, away from something, and if they can't see anything conservative, they'll progress against themselves.
yes. And I mean, you see this. You've seen this. This happened on Reddit, and it's happened on Tumblr as well. For what I understand before as well. I mean, I think the more sort of known example is the TERFs versus the trans lobby. I mean, that's pretty much a good example because both being progressives, have sort of turned on each other. One thing I'll probably just sort of maybe just sort of sort of structure this sort of question here, but from what I understand in previous conversations that Carl Benjamin has done with people on the reactionary right, let's say, um, on how to defeat progressives. His point is that we use classical liberalism to defeat progressive politics. And of course, people on the reactionary right saying, well, we can't because, as you pointed out, there is no, liberalism is just endless liberalization of, state, family, and whatever, and gender, and all that sort of stuff. And so you can't use it's like trying to argue. I mean, one example I've seen is people saying what to Sargon. It's like you trying to argue being Boromir and saying I'm going to use the One Ring to defeat Sauron. It's like, well, you can't because it's evil anyway. It's cannot be. You cannot use evil for good. And so I
Well,
just
I
wonder.
think
I think you can use evil for good if there's a rest position that's defined, but it's going to be messy getting there.
You see, I don't know because I think the problem is that if you engage in the sort of using classical liberalism to defeat progressivism, I think the problem is that you end up falling into sort of like the sort of ideological box that people like James Lindsay and Ben Shapiro and people like that fall into, where they end up sort of becoming um you end up becoming the very thing you want to destroy. Um, and so when we were talking earlier about having like clean slate, like just clearing out this sort of um, clearing out this the rabble that's in our managerial stuff is effectively you can't use what's against them, because I don't think it's worked. And also, one of the chap that I did the interview with, I mean, that was very much his position, and people that he surrounded himself with. And then I don't be horrible, because he was a really nice guy and great interviewer, but you know, we've heard this from the right, the sort of cultural right, for some time now, and it, in my opinion, we've had um many years, and it hasn't worked. In fact, in the last 2 years, and I think it's pretty safe to say, in the last 2 years, it has got significantly worse. So I think that's why a lot of people on the right, especially reactionaries, and you see more people becoming reactionary, is because they now sort of come to the realization that actually there is no way to change the system by adopting, the language. So yeah, I mean, that's something that I've come to, that I think if it requires genuine change, it has to be both on linguistic level change, but also outlook level,
Yeah.
and define. And so, like, when principle, when you said
So-
about being anti-materialist, that, I mean, that's a perfect example, because what you do is you're not even engaging with the old world arguments of left or right, or
Yeah.
capitalist, communist. You're not engaging with it.
Sorry, I was gonna say, like, in a certain sense, like, if things continues as they go, it's pretty evident that your country is going to be ruled by either Hindus or Muslims at some point in time. Hindus looking like they're winning because they're practically the entire government right now.
Yeah,
One might include Boris Johnson on account of him being a Turk instead of a Hindu. But like, you're basically ran by uh, people of Turkish and Hindu and occasionally Iranian descent. It's quite evident that these are moving up. These are groups moving up in the world of your country. Uh, and there's a benefit in this, in a certain degree, that when they do achieve a certain degree of threshold power, they're going to bring in with them new definitions and terms that are kind of going to free their hands from the old Labor versus Tory debates. Because, let's say it's 2050 and Britain has just elected its first, like, Sikh prime minister with
yeah,
like an all Hindu and Sikh uh, uh, cabinet, right? And there's a white Britain in sight, right?
yeah.
What on earth does this person care about what Labour and Tory are arguing about for the month? Does he have any concern whatsoever with their debates? Right? Does he care about, like, the EU or Israel or what the Germans are up to or the French? Does he really give a shit about any of this? Is it even relevant to him at all? Or is he more interested in running a country that looks decent in the world and makes himself look better? And he's more interested in, like, expressing, like a Hindu idealism of some kind, right? In some sense, the foreign conqueror kind of frees you from the frozen and fossilized political discourse, because once a foreigner gets out of power, he just doesn't give a shit about what you're debating, and it forces you and your enemy on the left to both come up with new political strategies and idioms, because the old ones no longer are relevant at all. And if you want power, you're gonna have to change direction. Um, and plus, there's a pretty good chance he'll just, like every good Hindu, he'll just export all the Muslims to France or something.
Yeah, the only problem is, and there's anybody with the, I mean, the only backpill to all of this with the Hindu side is, unfortunately, Britain was so good at empire and imperialism that we actually created a ridiculously effective bureaucratic state in India.
Yes, yeah. India is the British Empire as it should have been.
So the problem is, if we then get recolonized by, or like we live under the imperial yoke of our former colony of India, or imperial territory of India, then, I mean, we'd have bureaucratic managerialism 2.0, but it won't be I mean, it won't be with like the lesbian stilettos, but it will still be managerialism. I'm sorry, guys,
Yeah,
that is
but
another black
like
pill.
you've always had materialism in your country, right? Like
Yeah,
you're the guys who wrote the Doomsday Book, right? Right? That's
yeah,
like the achievement of medieval bugmen, right?
yeah, yeah,
So like this is unfortunately managerialism is a fundamentally uh British way of doing things since the Normans conquered you, and one might even argue since the Anglo-Saxons, right? Because they had the Thane system or whatever it was. Um, you've always been a land of managers, and you're actually kind of good at it because you conquered a quarter of the world, and your colonies are now the strongest third world countries. You just like even your mistakes like are functioning democracies. uh,
yeah,
and that unfortunate that sorry, go on.
yeah. I mean, we've created a rod for our own backs in many cases.
uh, so to get realistic though, it's quite evident that uh you do have to do things from the top down because that's from which policies come from. But uh if you think of the Supreme Court or any justice system as a kind of like, in the United States, the Supreme Court is essentially a political lag because
Yes.
the people in the court are always older. They always represent the last generation's views because they're there for so long. And so essentially the Supreme Court is always a lagging metric to slow down the system. It's just purely to slow things down. And to a certain degree, bureaucracy and the managers can be that. Even if tomorrow, some based like Britain first power came to power in the UK election, and the Tories were out and the Labour were out and the Lib Dems were out, and you had this like whatever magical party ruling, their ability to do anything stems from immediately replacing the middle management people en masse by the tens of thousands with new people. And
Yeah.
that work takes such an amount of effort that it's unlikely they can actually do it without getting like sunken under legal cases and laws and all kinds of things. You fired me unjustly. You fired me because I'm XYZ. You fired like if anybody tried to actually take over the managerial system aggressively in like a snap of a finger, they would essentially be sunken by the legal ramifications, right? It's just not practical. The
No.
practical way to actually change what you guys are to basically from outside of political power begin to manipulate these middle managers. I mean, kind of like how Tony Blair does this through NGOs, through initiatives, through financial and clubs, and like going to just straight up going to pubs and meeting the local people and encouraging them to get hired and work at local manager areas. Um, I've seen this in action. In America, there was this one architect who wanted to control what students were being taught in the Ivy League universities. And so
Mhm.
I'll just say who it was. It's Rem Koolhaas. Do you know who this is?
No.
He's a I think he's a German architect. I don't know. He didn't like the way American schools were teaching kids, and so he decided he was just going to conquer the schools and replace the middle management. So within the span of a few years, he had his office's publisher become the dean of Harvard. He had one of his other people become the dean of some other I think Cornell. He had his executives first get hired at Columbia, then work their way up into uh, the upper like the dean the commission to choose who the dean would be. And then once they were on that commission, one of the two executives dropped out of the commission, and then the other one put that person's name in and got the commission to elect them. And so within the
Okay.
span of about like 5 years or so, he took over pretty much every Ivy League architecture school.
and then use his influence to direct what the education would be. And that just took 5 years. And all he did was just have a loyal elite with him. Rem Koolhaas is if you look into him, he's quite an interesting character to study, but he takes over institutions and he directs what they're going to do. He didn't get elected. He didn't he's not a politician, but his actions will have direct consequences of how the students do these schools practice architecture for decades to come. And this is a pretty good example of how you do it, right? So like he practiced architecture, he made friends, he found loyal companions. And as a matter of fact, some of the people that he used were actually people he fired. And so because he fired them, he had like a certain power over them to use for other things. Um, so like, you want to get back with me, you do what I say, right? Sometimes it requires you like firing people and treating them a little dirty so that they come crawling back to you because you have power. But anyway, what he did is he basically like used his influence to get people hired into the managerial class. The managers had influence over the selection committees and HR departments, and then he replaced all the deans in a matter of a few years. He had total control of the institutions. Um, that's how you have to start thinking about this. You have to identify
Yeah.
what institutions have cultural impact. You have to put your resources into getting to know the hiring and HR departments, put a good word into them, get your people hired, and then slowly infiltrate and work through the system through essentially monthly meetings, goal finding, allocations for failures, and like distributing funds for success, right? And you create a kind of private shadow government that slowly comes to power. Sorry if that little rant, but that's just a really good example I know of from America.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because it sort of goes into my final point that we'll probably talk about. That it is now right building institutions outside of I guess because I mean outside the current elite managerial framework. Let's say that's the better way to describe it. So they won't be affected by um, they won't be affected by LGBT political philosophy or BLM or
Mm.
Greta Thunberg or anything. They're not going to be, that they're not going to be subverted and then end up supporting that and having, on their, on their sort of company logo the transracial rainbow flag. You know, uh, building institutions like that. Because the person again, sort of who I'm referencing about, who I interviewed, he's an expert in the Orange Order in Northern Ireland,
Yeah.
and the various sort of Protestant groups that exist there. And one thing that because I've been looking into the Orange Order and people like the UVF, a few paramilitary groups.
Mhm.
And one thing that's really funny is if you look at their counterparts in the IRA and nationalist groups, they have very strong ties, nationalist that is, to internationalist Marxists, revolutionaries. They are very much their iconography, and even in their artwork on the ground,
Mhm.
is directly referenced, like Marxist struggles.
Yeah, yeah.
They also have a strong.
Why do you think they all went very progressive once they took over? And now Ireland is a global homo shithole.
Yeah, well, yeah, good, classic example. They very much, and they, Sinn Féin south of the border. You had the sort of referendum on I think it was same-sex marriage, and you had good old Jerry Adams there, and IRA commander and everything, down there with all the kids going, "Yay, we're gay now." The IRA's gay. Always has been though. But they supported the gay as well, not just gay, but the gay. Um, and also they had like there was Palestine and everything, so they were very much on board with the internationalist, progressive, crazy train, from really the outset, I would say. And also one big mythos in Northern Ireland with nationalist communities is that during the civil rights movement in America, they they've sort of retconned a lot of what, in my opinion, is just pointless riots ethnic riots, they've retconned those as civil rights demonstrations. Yeah, so they're basically equate them to their struggle to the blacks in the South and all that sort of stuff in America. So because it happened in the 60s and 70s. So there's a lot of that's a new thing that's forming around. Ian Paisley, by the way, is my favorite civil rights activist. Dr. Ian Paisley.
I don't know that joke.
Okay. I'll explain to you Dr. Ian Paisley afterwards. But he so that's been the thing. Now, if you look at the other side in this, so this would be the Orange Order, which is the Orange Order is a very old I guess you could say like a they're like the Freemasons. Okay, this is I know people get pissed off when I say this. They are very similar to the Freemasons, but of course they're not the Freemason. But they have like a similar structure to it in the sense of they are exclusive organizations. So to be an Orangeman, you have to be a Protestant. So no Catholics, obviously, no Muslims or Jews or anything like that. You have to be
the Orange. I know Orange is a Protestant group.
Orange and everything. You can be any race. There are actually black Orangemen, like in Jamaica and such. And you also have a lot of like Canadians as well. I remember there was like seeing footage of like a few Native American Orangemen. So there isn't like a racial divide. It's just based on I guess political philosophy and religion, because another big tenet is, of course, you have to be a monarchist, unionist, and along with being a Protestant. So you have to be sort of all those sort of qualities and everything to hold all those sorts of values. And so they're a large group in Northern Ireland with the Protestant community. They do marching bands every year, 12th of July, to mark the Battle of the Boyne. And they're also very active in the community. Then you have the UVF, which was they're sort of more ceremony role, but they were the OG paramilitary group that helped, that sort of put a stop to Ulster, the province of Ulster, joining the new Irish Free State. They were the ones that were like, no, we're not going to. We're loyal to Britain, and so you had the signing of the Ulster Covenant, they're still technically classed as a paramilitary organization, but they're not. And then you have the UDA, which are they're classed as a paramilitary and a terrorist organization in I think in the UK and in Ireland. But what's amazing about those sort of three groups is that during their entire existence, they have if you ever interact with them, and I've interacted with I have to be careful how I word this legally. I've interacted with one of them, the Orange Order, that is, before, and I've met people. It is in Scotland, in the lodge in Scotland, so it's a bit different in Northern Ireland. But even still, they have they have no whiff of the POS or the global American empire about them. It's like they've actually miraculously been completely fortunate. They've just avoided all of this. And what you interacted in Minecraft, indeed.
We shared server IP addresses, right?
Yeah, we serve server IP addresses, and oh god, no, I shouldn't make a joke because I'm going to get a visit by the MI5 in a minute if I keep on making these jokes. And I was explaining this to our interview, who's an expert in this. He actually, he did say that his observation, because he did a bit more extensive research and meeting, them, is effectively they are their purpose was to exist outside government control. They continued to, and they were you had a good sort of like revival under the point when Northern Ireland became separated from that sort of separated from the Irish Free State to become its own thing, and remaining on the defensive, and it resulted in and then of course when you had the Troubles and everything, you had more sort of strong tribal lines, and then at the end of it, you've got this sort of situation where inadvertently everything that the POS sort of attached itself to was the IRA and Irish nationalism, and so the orange the orange Protestant lot saw that and was like, well, we're just going to be everything opposite to that. And so that's why if you go to like the Shankill Road or Rangers matches, like I went to a Rangers match in Glasgow, you end up seeing like Israeli flags, for example. Now, it's not because they support Israel; it's because they just support the opposite of what Irish nationalists support. But what's amazing in that is inadvertently they've actually freed themselves from the POS because they are an institution outside of government control. I know this is a bit of a ramble, everyone, but this is the point. Is it
how much do the Americans hate them though?
I understand that in places like New York and Boston, the orange lot are not viewed favorably, including a certain Joe Biden, who is he's very much not an orangeman, let's say. Compared to Trump, compared to Trump, because as Rival Fez points out, Trump was an honourable orangeman. He was the most orangeman of them all. So, yeah. So, because rival institutions which have a real set goal, like what sort of have come up in I say in the sort of Protestant communities in Northern Ireland, it does work. It does work. It takes time though. I mean, what was it when you had the 1688 to 2000? Okay, so it does take a bit of time for these things to sort of but that's the point. It's these sort of power structures do that are independent and not connected. They do have value to them, and that's why I've sort of saying now to people, what rival institutions is, I would say go ahead, create them, because I think it's more cost effective to create something independent of the current power sort of the network than try and infiltrate something to root it out, because in my experience, if you try and root progressives out of something, whether it's like the National Trust or even a library or a school, they will know. They can always tell when you're trying to root them out. So it becomes a battle where they have you have everything to lose and they have everything to gain.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm trying to think of how to. I've forgotten what this topic of this part of the discussion was.
So emergent. So I mean, to do a summary, because this was about emergent and top down.
Yeah.
My sort of takeaway from our discussion is that all political actions, all actions revolving around policy and politics, is determined is determined top down, and that the people at the foot soldiers who are the ones that enact it in the real world that we see in real
Mhm.
time, are they act independent and in a decentralized way, where they obviously don't receive direct orders, but they
Yeah.
have I what I like to coin, and maybe people can people watching now can use this now, the sort of the Thomas Becket, um, the sort of Thomas Becket. I don't say it's Thomas Becket. Thomas, what's they called? Thomas Becket scenario or Thomas Becket system? Yeah, Thomas Becket system, where you know Henry II, he didn't tell the knights go and murder go and murder Thomas Becket, but he said in a sort of roundabout way what he wanted. He wanted him gone, and so they did it, and they sort of understood what he meant in the roundabout way.
Yeah.
Um,
I do think we know that like there's this kind of informal orders that are given out through like quote unquote the experts at quote unquote journalism. Like whenever a New York Times person writes something, for whatever reason, that dictate flows to eventually be the voice of like various protest groups. I don't know how that flow occurs, but I think it's pretty obvious that it occurs. And
yeah.
so, we've discussed a lot about like tactics and how to change things, but it's also worth considering how do you kind of operate counterintelligence a little bit. I think it is worth mentioning. It is worth looking at like how can you distract these foot soldiers so that they go bark up the wrong tree, right? So one example I think that's been pretty famous is like, for example, the OK sign being attributed to white supremacy and how ridiculous that is. That was like memed into existence. Like
Yeah.
4chan started as a joke, and then eventually if a Times reporter said something dumb about it being real, and then now all the foot soldiers think the OK sign is like white supremacy. But this obviously is just a massive waste of intellectual effort. Like the more time you spend arguing over is the OK sign white supremacy or not, the less time you can spend debating about like whatever cringe topics are being pushed now. Like if you waste your time talking about the OK sign, you're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about like diddling your kids or something. Uh,
So
this, sorry.
so yeah, that was a good point. So one thing this is something that just reminded me in 20 Steve Bannon, who was um instrumental in the Trump campaign in its origin, even though he left
Yeah.
during Trump's time as president quite early on. But in the campaign stuff originally, he was more important than any advisor because he was the one that capitalized on um, the stagnation of the media, right, the mainstream media.
Hmm.
And what he did was, and he coined the term, you're basically the media, he managed to get the media to lose control of information, so information war, and they lost control of information. And I mean, in my,
That was happening for a while though.
yeah, but that happened a while, but he was able to, I- from my understanding, um, and this is where we go into like the build up to 2016 election with as you mentioned, like 4chan and that sort of glorious period of like Keck and all that and Pepe the
Hmm.
Frogs and all that sort of stuff. It was actually elite managed in the sense that 4chan and the sort of attention that it brought itself to, like by the Clinton and the campaign, was deliberate in the sense that you had very powerful people who were behind stuff on 4chan, as you say,
Yeah.
as a way to humiliate and to uh, I guess sort of keep the progressives running around in circles
Yes.
on that level. And the thing is, what was great about 4chan is the foot soldiers for our side, our side of foot soldiers, were able to join in on the action.
Yeah. I will hazard that, like, nowadays 4chan is not so much that, and Twitter is too biased. It's like you if you want another 2016, you have to get your foot soldiers off of the feeding trough of the left. So like back then, Twitter didn't really do anything to like bias what tweets trended or not. Now they do. They do a lot, right?
Yeah.
You're never gonna see 2016 repeat until you are off of centrally controlled platforms. And that means eventually, I've always said like you should try to organize a right wing exodus from Twitter. Just leave. Just go somewhere else. I'd recommend Gab, but
Yeah.
just leave. Like leave Twitter in mass and don't look back. Yeah, you want to go and dab on some leftists. Cool, cool. No one gives a shit, buddy. The leftists will follow you where you go. So go places. This is like people. The right wing thinks that they have to be on Twitter because that's where everyone is. But in
Yeah.
fact, if they all left Twitter, Twitter would be very boring, and all the reporters and other people would go to Gab to go see what the right wing people are talking about because the progressives are a leech and they need someone to attack, and so they'll follow the right wing people to find out what to attack. And that's also when you should feed them like fake leads to like go, like I think right now a lot of journalists are arguing that freedom is white supremacy for the trucker stuff, which is just hilarious.
Yeah.
This is like an obvious, this is a demonstrably bad take that will not, it, it should be pushed by the right wing because it's clearly a waste of time, and the more time they spend wasted, the more time they waste discussing if freedom is white supremacy, which is an obviously shit take, the less time they can stop the counterattack against like woke shit in schools and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That there needs to be like, sorry, there needs to be some like this can only really be done by like organizing right wing content creators and like deciding what ridiculous thing we can like get the left wing to talk about, to waste time to like essentially run counter operations on them, and
Yeah.
like you see this, there's a primitive attempt of this onto the right because they'll gaslight right wingers to discuss stupid shit like I think Q is a great example where like nobody really believes in Q. This is just a joke, but they got gaslit so much by the left wing media that now everyone's talking about Q on the right as if anybody even believes it. So
Yeah.
it's obviously a psyops. It's like this is wasted time. The more time you spend wasted, the more wasted effort you put into discussing Q, arguing whatever you think about it, is it's just wasted effort. It's a psyop. You're not
Yeah.
discussing things that actually matter.
I don't know what your opinion is, but on this individual who I've never really talked about on my channel because I don't know him, and it's sort of blown up here in the UK. We have a chap called Louis Theroux, who is a specky four-eyed leftist twat who's also happens to be a journalist, and he interviewed. He likes he's a very strange sort of. Likes to interview very, very like he likes to do documentaries on very like extreme peoples, let's say, in the past. So like
Yeah.
he went and did like the West Bay Baptist Church, pedophiles living in pedophile communities in America, um, like neo-Nazis in California. Um,
Yeah.
and what was the other one? Oh, and also like a brothel and then porn stars. I mean, he even featured in the gay porno, and everything, right? And so he's his latest one is he's done like the Groypers and Nick Fuentes,
Yeah.
um, and Baked Alaska and all those people. And what's really funny because it's been like a big thing, well, not it's not a big thing here, but it's been like a quite noticeable in Britain because it's like uh, obviously people who normally who don't know who he is or anything about them is like, oh
Yeah.
my god, these people are they actually are very dangerous, and it's because unlike the neo Nazis who were just like fat hillbillies who living in California with on a sort of with their trucks and everything. The like people like Nick Fuentes and such, they actually are a bit different. I mean, the thing is, what he sort of the angle is, oh, we're gamers. That was like the soft. So Nick Fuentes
Yeah,
and
let the left wing panic about gamers, because the more panicking they do about that, the less they can actually waste time making our lives miserable.
Yeah. But I think one thing I noticed that because I mean, I will say Nick Fuentes is quite a. If you were to like talk about Nazis and everything in the minds of a leftist, Nick Fuentes is quite well spoken. If you were to think about, yeah, okay, yeah, there's a bit of, but he's quite well spoken. He's not like got freaking swastika tattooed. Well, he might do, I don't know, but he's mixed race and everything, and I think is he Catholic?
As you know, fascists are the most diverse group of people in the world.
Yeah, they also have the most diverse friend group as well. But
I actually I'm completely serious about this. This is like, I don't know why this. I think AA has mentioned that because mixed race people have a identity crisis, they almost always end up becoming like some kind of retarded race extremist, because like they're trying to like project for their lack of purity or something. So they just get like sucked up into like racial purity nonsense because they're very sensitive about it themselves.
wasn't like Hitler's grandfather or great grandfather Jewish? Wasn't that a
I
thing?
don't know. I don't know, but I do know that his editor for Mein Kampf was.
Yeah, and
I'm not kidding you.
yeah, yeah. So
There's this. I don't want to like detour the chat, detour the discussion, but it's hilarious because his editor was half Jewish, and at one point in time, Rudolf Hess wanted to throw him into the gas chambers, and Hitler ended up defending his half Jewish editor because of this. And it caused a major division into the Nazi government over whether this half Jewish editor should be allowed to be part of the Nazi regime. And Hitler actually defended him while Rudolf Hess was like, "No, purity, purity." It's like not even Hitler was a Puritan enough for Rudolf Hess. You're a whole bunch of fucking retards.
yeah, and yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah. So what was I saying? Oh fuck! I talk about Nazis again. Yeah. So yeah, Nick Fuentes and Louis Theroux. But one thing I noticed really just why I don't really take them seriously anyway is Baked Alaska and you had Brittany Venti on there, like fucking like names from 2016 again. Like people, it was really fun because it was like having a sort of like a flashback, like sort of go down memory lane again, back to 2016. And you basically like people like Baked Alaska and such, their whole thing, along with like a few others like the sort of the people they referred to as gamers who were part of that community, film themselves like on Twitch in public and then just like harassing black people and Hispanics, and that's basically that, and then sort of like starting arguments in the street with like random like Karens as well in Florida, which
Yeah.
like, Florida Karens is pretty funny, but obviously, Louis is like, he's sort of, I don't know. It's really funny because he sort of like blows it out of proportion in the sense is, oh my god, that this is the future, right? And it's like they're not doing anything. They're just like getting clickbaits and harassing people in the street. They're not actually doing anything.
Yeah, they're kind of just like the frontist types are basically just like anarchists because they haven't really they're very passionate about not being passionate.
Yeah.
It's hard to describe them. They're basically like functionally anarchists against any system at all.
I mean, one thing I would say is the last great victory by I not just, and this wasn't just the dissident right and people on the right, but also on the internet like side, but also like a bit of a coalition of people, was the whole event around GameStop and the shares around GameStop. Because if you look at the fallout from that, like when it came to how it affected certain US senators like Elizabeth Warren, and Nancy Pelosi's, I think, husband as well. And people, I mean, that actually did cause like the sort of competing with that hedge. Was it Melvin? Was it Melvin Capital? Yeah, Melvin Capital, and basically out sort of pacing them and then bringing a hedge fund down. I mean, that caused more damage to the system than anything I can think of in quite some time.
I totally agree. That's another good example of wasting your enemy's mental power, panicking over things that they probably, these people probably shouldn't have been this invested into these things anyway, right? Right?
Yes.
They had their hand in a honeypot. So, in many ways, by doing these things, you're kind of like forcing your enemy to waste resources on really like, cleanup jobs. Basically, they clean up jobs. They try to clean up poor financial decisions. I wouldn't recommend doing something like the GME stock multiple times because it's a pretty heavy investment to start memes like that. Like that kind of stuff can come about by like a millionaire or something, or someone leaking the information to Wall Street Bets. And quite honestly, they're just like, it's nice when it happens, but it's so rare. Like right now, what's happening with the Canadian banks.
Yeah, they're freezing bank accounts, aren't they now?
Well, it's more like the banks themselves are failing because there's a run on the money. Because Canadians now know that their money can get frozen, so everybody's taking their money out of the banks,
Oh
not
yeah,
just
yeah.
truckers. Oh, I think you just broke out. Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. You disappeared for a second.
Oh, okay, mate. We've got a storm coming in on my end, so pretty bad storm. So it
okay.
That might be it. Yeah. I mean, one thing was there was a It's really interesting because the question is obviously who's backing the truckers and the people who are against Trudeau on this, because there was
it was the Conservatives, yeah. It was the Conservative Party. And various other people.
From people who financed the Conservative Party in Canada, it wasn't so much the party itself, it was those who are the money behind it, and maybe a few conservative
AI, you're breaking up every couple of seconds from me. I think maybe your storm's getting pretty intense.
Okay, hold on a sec. How about now?
Yeah, now you're fine.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's a few sort of money men who finance the Conservative Party in Canada have it. From my understanding, they're the ones who've been sort of pushing this, because I remember a few days ago you had when you had the freeze of bank accounts by people who were don't giving money to the truckers. There was a suggestion. I think
You're breaking up pretty badly. It may just be time to bring it to a close for now, and then we can continue discussion after the storm. I know it's a pretty bad storm out there.
Yeah. Okay. I'll end now. Thank you everyone for watching. Crenshaw, can you still hear me at all?
Yeah, I can hear you. It's just every like 5 seconds it cuts out with a delay.
Right. Okay. So yeah, I think the storm's coming in. I can hear it outside. It's pretty bad. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you all later.
Yeah, fun talk.